I'm super into the really vague terminology of use your ears. So when I put the Faraday limiter on, and it's a limiter, right? That's a tool. It's a limiter, but I'm not really using it to limit very much. But it does, when I do drop that threshold down, I'm always working on the output gain. I'm not usually doing more than 1 to 2 dB of any difference between threshold and output, right? I'm monitoring my gain. I'm not just dropping the threshold and seeing what it does. Like, I'm always bringing the two down together. You can link them. So you're only really affecting something. I'm only really affecting something a dB or two. Sometimes it's cool to put limiters on reverb tails to add a density to the tail, the reverb, and then like with that fast release, like it'll just let go at some point. Like, you can really dial in density of space with a limiter. So I like to use limiters on in that style on effects, bringing up tails of delays too, really making sure you get that last decay, the last bit, you know. So that's a reason for a limiter versus a saturating tool.
I wanted to maybe sort of riff on something you said, this idea of use your ears, use your ears. I think people might hear that and go, oh, they're just saying, you know, don't take tips, just get good at listening. But use your ears, I think, has to stem from trust your ears. And the way you trust your ears is a bit of what we were talking about before, which is limit your options and go deep with some things and see what they really do, and see what, you know, even something like Decapitator, which is one of my favorite saturation plugins, distortion plugins. It has all kinds of modes and all kinds of ways, different buttons that combine in different ways that do cool stuff. Go to the limit of what something has, what a plugin has, what a synth has, and go really deep with it. So then when you are in the process of trying different things or trying new things, you have a huge, deep base of knowledge that you trust because you know what this one thing sounds like. It's something that why I like analog synth so much. Something like the Juno 6 that I mentioned. I keep pointing because it's right there. That it's something that you have to use your ears because there are no presets, there's no MIDI control, there's no nothing. So anytime you move a knob, you go, oh, it does that. And when I change the resonance, it's a very simple synthesizer. So things like that, you know, if it's FabFilter EQ or it's a Juno 6 or a particular synth plugin, finding something that's simple and effective and knowing every little detail about it allows me to then go, I trust my ears because I'm deep on a few things, then I can use my ears, as we say. I mean, it is sort of a funny response when somebody says, what do you use? I just go, use your ears. But it's true. You have to be able to go deep on some things in order to trust your ears. And then it turns out you can use them, and that is the right answer.
I have two things on that. I love that. Two things. So think about a chef. Think about a chef going to the farmer's market and always cooking in season. You got a Swiss chard. You don't have romaine. You don't have kale, you have Swiss chard. Well, I've never cooked with Swiss chard before, so I need to know everything you could do with it. Well, what can you do with the stems? How bitter is the stem versus that? What are we going to use that with? Are we going to cut that with some acid? Are we going to use some lime with that? Maybe you need a richer olive oil with the leaves on it because it's really thick. And, like, you know, I don't really know too much about Swiss chard, but you're going to learn everything about that if you're going to serve it to maybe 300 people at your restaurant that night and you haven't mastered Swiss chard yet. That's what you're going to do, right? So why is that any different? Now, thinking about your ears or your palate in that sense, your palate or your ear is your differentiator, right? So doubling down on yourself and your ears, what you hear is your best chance at standing out, because I've used this analogy a fair amount just in my own world, which is I'm never going to be Jason Joshua, right? So why am I going to try to copy Jason Joshua? Because Jason is going to do the best Jason ever. He's so good at being Jason Joshua. The best chance I have for getting hired equally to Jason Joshua is to be the best John Castelli that I possibly can be, right? That's why I always go back to use your ears, because that's our best shot at standing out and getting consistent work in what we do. And as a producer, too, you have to sound familiar enough to be reminiscent of something that's either on the radio or in the genre you're working on. But you need to be a little bit left of that because you're not going to out Max Martin. You know, that you have to think that way just enough to say, okay, I want to exist in this lane. I want to know this. So I as vague as I think use your ears or use your palate as a chef or use your eyes as a photographer is, that's the only way we can truly be us. And if we think even deeper about that, that's the easiest thing to do, right? It's so much harder to copy someone. And this also, I should specify, I think it's actually great for young people to try to copy what other people do to a certain degree. But to find your own voice along the way, sure, try it. But again, someone's gonna go to Jason Joshua before me for Jason, right? There's just no way I don't want to do what he does. Only for that reason, I think a lot of moves that he does are really great. But if I do them, I'm just never gonna do them like he does. So even for someone constantly learning like me, who's still pretty young in his field, I'm also listening to what other people do to not do that at this point, versus I was listening in order to say, oh, I like that. How did they get that result? And, oh, I heard this was the trick and tool they use. It's nice that that's why I got those 3 to 5 tools out of the way in our conversation is I want people to go use the Decapitator and Saturn. I think those are great tools, but you're never going to use them exactly how I use them. You might leave them on the stock setting right off the bat and you get what you want, right? There's no tweakability factor of it that makes you sound like me. It's just not going to be a thing. And we need to reinforce that. So when you're riffing on the idea of use your ears, it really always comes back to that, because if you're constantly referencing a being, somewhere along the way, you're going to miss where you were aiming for. And you should always try to get to where you're aiming for.
Well, it sounds like on some level what we're talking about, use your ears, trust your ears, develop your taste. That's really what it is. There's a great, the author Neil Gaiman has a commencement speech, which everyone should go watch. Just say Neil Gaiman commencement speech. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's unbelievable. But one of the quotes from it basically is a commencement speech to a graduating class at an art college in like 2011. And it's basically how to be a creative person in a capitalist world. It's an amazing speech. I watch it every few months. I send it to half the people I work with. It's so good. But he has a quote in there. He says, you don't find your voice. Like the instinct at the beginning of your creative life is to copy, and it's not a bad instinct. The quote is, you don't find your voice until you've sounded like a lot of other people. And that transition from I'm copying, I'm referencing to I'm going deep and developing my tastes, because now I'm hearing lots of different things. I've tried different things, but what is it that appeals to me and how deep can I go? You really got to develop that taste as a mix engineer, as a producer, as a writer. And then when we talk about trusting your ears, it's really trusting your taste. And that comes from, I think you said it's easy. I would say maybe something different, which is that it's simple but difficult, which is that it's not hard to develop taste. It just takes commitment and takes time and takes focus. And so when you are trusting your ears on something, on a mix, it's because you've spent a lot of time developing knowing what you're hearing, knowing what you like, knowing what the tools do, so that you can just quickly make a little high-end EQ boost and you're like, that's the right thing, rather than running through 6 plugins and is this better? I'm going to A/B. I don't know. You don't have to do that process.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I by no means think that it's easy to develop your ears. I think that's when we talk about mastery of work and a craft. It takes a ton of time, and sometimes I have to take a step back. And I'm talking by experience, and I should take a step back and say, well, I guess along the way, here are some things that I did to develop that. And hearing you push back on that was really helpful, because really we have to get feedback, and you're testing things out along the way, whether it's for friends, family, other peers and professionals in your field. We really have to get pushback and feedback from other people. So then ask why. So if someone critiques your work and you're like, oh, you're wrong, like they don't know what they're talking about, they're a dentist. It's like, oh, okay, the dentist is who consumes my music on the way home from work. Like, the dentist might know better than I do in a sense, because they're listening completely emotionally and connecting or not connecting, right? They don't know that I use FabFilter Saturn 1 or 2 and which mode I use. Like, who gives a fuck what mode you use? Like, to get an emotional connection to the music for the listener, right? So we need feedback. That's something that we need to talk about. Sure, you can develop skills and you can develop your taste, but if no one likes your taste, then no one's going to listen to it. So testing your mixes and not the car test, not the AirPod test, testing your mixes on peers, on family, on friends, on your girlfriend, on people that are going to really, really have a non-biased reaction to, does this make them feel something? And that can be an A-B on a technical level of which reverb works better on the vocal, right? Like it can be an A-B of a different textured EQ move. It can be all those things. I mean, I've had homies come over and play a beat, and we've either talked about the difference in arrangement from the demo to the final version that was sent to the artist, or a lo-fi-ness to a hi-fi quality to the drums. And just we need to be openly giving criticism and feedback and taking it, yes, sometimes with a grain of salt, but if someone says something, think about it and then ask why they said it, right? There's always going to be a reason why. If they can't answer why, I don't know. Well, then maybe take that one with a grain of salt. But I always ask why someone felt a certain way, and then there's usually another layer to that of understanding.